Welcome to this webinar on the My Story strand of Goodness Me, Goodness You. GMGY Webinar 2 is the second in a series of 5 webinars which aims to increase participants' appreciation, understanding, confidence and competence in the Patrons curriculum for community national schools. GMGY webinars, such as this one, are one part of the structured implementation process designed to facilitate the implementation of Goodness Me, Goodness You in community national schools. For more information on this implementation process, please see the Implementation Plan Information for CNS Teacher booklet shown here on the screen. This webinar aims to provide an overview of Strand 1 My Stories. It also aims to discuss the centrality of identity and story to the strand. Finally, the webinar will outline some approaches and methodologies to support teaching and learning in this strand of the curriculum. Before moving on, it is important to highlight this navigation signpost, which will guide participants through the webinar. Participants should take note that this pink symbol signals an opportunity to engage in individual reflection and, where possible, converse with colleagues using suggested reflection questions. This webinar is divided into 2 parts. In Part 1, participants will be provided with an introduction to the My Stories strand. This section will focus on the centrality of identity and story to the strand. Later on, in Part 2, participants will engage with suggested methodologies and approaches for teaching My Stories. We will now begin our exploration of the My Stories strand of GMGY. From the outset, it's important to remind ourselves that the strand which is the focus of this webinar today is one of 4 unique but interdependent strands within the GMGY curriculum. Each of these 4 strands represent the main areas of learning described by the curriculum, but they are not discrete areas of learning. They overlap and interact to form a holistic learning experience for the child. Throughout this webinar, participants should bear the other 3 strands of GMGY in mind. Specifically, participants should reflect throughout on how engagement in the My Story strand might support and reinforce learning across the curriculum. My Stories is the first strand of GMGY. Along with the other 3 strands of the curriculum, the My Stories strand helps children to develop a confident and positive sense of self and group identity, as well as a sense of belonging while having respect for and understanding of the identity and belonging of others. Specifically, the My Story strand is about children developing a positive sense of who they are and feeling that they are valued and respected as part of a family, a school, and a community. There are 3 elements in the My Story strand, all of which are revisited across each of the 4 stages. Collectively, these 3 elements enable teachers to take an inclusive approach to identity, meaning they try to support all aspects of a child's identity. Engagement in the element My Life provides an explicit opportunity to affirm children's personal identity, or the markers which they use to describe themselves as unique. Learning through the element titled My Relationships helps to foster the social identity of the children, or how they associate themselves with others to develop a sense of belonging. The third and final element of this strand, My Spaces and Places, provides an opportunity for an exploration of the local, national, and international contexts within which children's identities are shaped and influenced. Identity is a key concept within the My Stories strand. Identity is also a multifaceted concept. There are so many layers to our identities, and because of this, GMGY takes an inclusive understanding of identity. This means the curriculum is concerned with children's personal and social identity, as well as their identity structure and processes, and finally the context within which children's identities are shaped. Personal identity refers to the markers we use to describe ourselves as unique. In terms of their personal identity, a child might describe themselves as an artist or a musician, a swimmer, calm, confident, nervous, someone's friend or sibling. Within GMGY, there is an emphasis on supporting the development of a child's personal identity across each stage. This is evident from the learning outcomes within the My Story strand. Starting at stage 1, children identify and analyse their personal attributes and recognise the value of these attributes. Children are also provided with an opportunity to reflect on their personal achievements, as well as listen to the narrative of influential figures and consider how these stories might influence their own sense of self and belonging. Later, in stage 4, children are provided with the opportunity to consider their own role in shaping their personal identity by imagining a narrative for their future self. Social identity refers to those aspects of the child's identity which gives them a sense of belonging. These are the aspects of the child's identity which they share with others. In terms of their social identity, a child might associate themselves with teams or clubs, or use a name which indicates the family to which they belong. They might also describe themselves as a speaker of a particular language, a resident or local in an area, or a member of a particular religion or belief. GMGY provides an opportunity to support the development of the child's social identity across each stage of the curriculum. As with personal identity, this is evident across the learning outcomes within the My Story strand. Through these learning outcomes, children come to appreciate their sense of belonging to a home, a family, and a community. They also reflect on stories from the Irish tradition and around the world. Engaging with these narratives helps children appreciate the cultural value of these stories to their own communities and those of others, as well as foster a sense of belonging at a local, national, and international level. Notably, these learning outcomes reflect the connection between children's social identity and the context within which their sense of belonging is shaped. From stage 1 to stage 4, there is a clear progression from the child's consideration of micro or local contexts and macro and global contexts within which their identity develops. Although the earlier stages focus more on the local, teachers should be confident engaging children insofar as possible as national and global citizens from stage 1 onwards. Having an inclusive understanding of identity through GMGY means that teachers should also be considerate of children's identity structure and processes. These refer to how the various aspects of a child's identity relate to one another. For example, sometimes aspects of personal identity may not align with aspects of social identity, and vice versa. Through GMGY, teachers may discover that a child's religious or belief identity may not align with that of their family or community. Children may also belong to a family which values a particular sport in which the child holds no personal interest. Notably, the My Story strand aims to give autonomy and agency to the child in formulating a sense. The My Story strand provides a structured way to apply an inclusive understanding of identity to teaching and learning. Through the strand, CNS teachers can be responsive to the broad and complex nature of identity through responsive methodologies and approaches which allow children to express their identity as they understand it. In addition to identity, a second concept which is important to the My Story strand is story. Stories from books, the media, as well as the narratives we internalise from our engagement with our friends, family, and others, all help to shape our identity, as well as our understanding of the identity of others. It is important to emphasise the IES in the title of this strand. Through this strand, children are provided with the opportunity to engage with many stories from a variety of people and places, all of which aims to support the development of perspective, empathy, and ultimately challenge the concept of the single story. Nigerian writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie very clearly articulates the problem with the single story by stating that the single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Bearing in mind the significance of stories to Strand 1 and the inclusive understanding of identity underpinning it, participants should now take a moment to consider the methodologies, approaches, and resources which would support children's learning within this strand. The remainder of this webinar aims to build on Part 1, and in particular on participants' discussion on suggested methodologies, approaches, and resources for teaching My Stories. Part 2 will provide examples of how learning outcomes from this strand might be developed into meaningful learning experiences for children. An example will be provided for each stage of the curriculum. That said, participants should be conscious that suggested methodologies and approaches can be adapted to suit any stage, and that there are many more methodologies and approaches which can be used to teach this strand. To begin, we will consider how at stage 1, teachers might help children to identify and analyse their personal attributes and recognise the value of these attributes. From the outset, it is important to state that GMGY learning outcomes, such as this one, are broad statements which describe the expected learning at the end of each 2-year stage. As such, a lesson in GMGY will focus in on a particular aspect of the outcome, and each learning outcome will need to be revisited a number of times across each stage. This exemplar will focus in on the personal attributes aspect of this learning outcome from the element My Life. Picture books are a wonderful way to explore personal attributes and other concepts with children through the My Stories strand. When exploring personal attributes with children, as outlined in the learning outcome for this exemplar, teachers might consider using picture books to explore concepts such as physical appearance, race, religion, belief, language, gender, nationality, or disability, to name a few. Engagement with carefully selected picture books not only helps children to build on their existing understanding of such concepts, but through dialogue and reflection can develop children's thinking, emotional and deliberative skills, as well as foster positive attitudes and dispositions, including an appreciation of diversity. In helping children to foster their appreciation of diversity through picture books, or when using other methodologies and approaches, it is vital for teachers to take a critical approach during the preparation and teaching and learning processes. For example, by using picture books such as these, children can be invited to identify not just their similarities, but also their differences, and how these differences shape their experience of the world. Because of the colour of their skin, black children and white children will experience the world in very different ways. Such difference is often downplayed or ignored in schools. In fact, in order to treat everybody equally, teachers often try to ignore or downplay racial and ethnic difference and focus on sameness instead. Known as colour blindness, this minimisation of difference, although well-meaning, is counterproductive. Children notice and attach meaning to race and other forms of difference, particularly physical difference. Helping children to identify, discuss, and analyse difference can contribute to their awareness of discrimination in society, as well as empower them as active citizens to challenge such discrimination and bring about change for themselves and others. In using picture books to explore concepts such as personal attributes with children through GMGY, it is vital that teachers are considerate of the fact that the available repertoire of stories and images within a culture reflects the dominant assumptions and expectations concerning gender, as well as those relating to race, sexuality, physical ability, and other aspects of social identity and embodied experience. As such, teachers must choose picture books with care, ensuring that the picture books chosen have relevance to the child's life, because critical literacy begins with exploring issues that prompt children to think and talk about social issues that have meaning for them. The flexibility and agency afforded through GMGY allows for teachers working in various contexts to identify the most suitable picture books for the children in their class. A suggested book list for the My Story strand and each of the other strands of the curriculum are available to CNS teachers, who are invited to review these lists during the preparation for teaching and learning process. When using picture books in GMGY, but also generally speaking, teachers can enhance children's learning experiences through effective questioning techniques. First and foremost, effective questioning helps teachers to learn about where the children are coming from and build on their prior knowledge and understanding. Use of open-ended, higher order and philosophical questions in particular can facilitate a community of inquiry wherein complex concepts and ideas can be explored in an environment where there is no right answer. Effective questioning techniques which foster a community of inquiry can help create a safe space through which assumptions, misconceptions, and stereotypes can be identified, unravelled, and challenged. Most importantly, effective questioning in GMGY should not just come from the teacher, but through effective modelling and skill development from the children themselves, who through their questions can take ownership over their own learning journey. Considering the opportunities presented through GMGY for assumptions, misconceptions, and stereotypes to be identified, give examples of the questions a teacher might ask to unravel and challenge gender, racial, or other stereotypes. Take 5 minutes to reflect on this question independently and then, where possible, with a partner or small group. This next exemplar will explore the following learning outcome from Stage 2, My Stories, My Relationships. Through this learning outcome, children should be enabled to share the narratives of their family and community and recognise their own value as part of that family and community unit. Remembering again that a lesson in GMGY will explore particular aspects of a learning outcome, this exemplar will enable children to share the narratives of their family and in so doing foster their sense of belonging. There are a variety of methodologies and approaches teachers could employ to enable children to share family narratives. For example, children might read a story, recount an event, sing a song, recite a poem, create an image or illustration, or even display photos or videos for their class. Artifacts are a great stimulus to enable children to share family narratives. Teachers can invite children to bring toys, religious or belief artifacts, family heirlooms, books, letters, or even items associated with celebrations or events to school. At Stage 2, teachers might scaffold children's sharing of their family narrative through a 3-2-1 approach, through which each child might identify 3 words to describe their artifact, 2 facts about where it came from, and 1 reason why it's important to them. Of course, this approach can be adapted to engage children at different stages of the curriculum. When inviting children to bring in artifacts to school, teachers should bear in mind that the My Story strand aims to give autonomy and agency to the child in formulating a sense of who they are in dialogue with their families, peers, and community at a particular time and in a specific context. As such, Teachers should provide children with the opportunity to select artifacts which they would like to use to represent their family narrative at a particular point in time, as opposed to searching for an artifact which fits in with a specific category defined by the teacher. For example, instead of inviting children to share artifacts representing their family's religion or belief, or their community or country of origin, teachers might scaffold children's artifact selection in broader terms. Children might be asked to bring in artifacts that tell their class about another member of their family, a special time their family shared together, or something that makes their family unique. Such prompts scaffold children enough to ensure they reflect carefully when identifying an artifact to bring to school, but also provide enough flexibility that the overall learning experience facilitates the voice of the child. By allowing children to influence the direction of their own learning, teachers show greater regard for student voice. Notably, engaging with student voice is an essential pedagogical tool. Teachers should recognize, represent, and value cultural diversity in ways that it resonates with students, thus providing authenticity. Without using student voice as a pedagogical tool, might lead teachers to implement activities that unconsciously silence or stereotype students. Participants should now take a moment to consider how they have facilitated the voice of the child through GMGY. Participants should take 5 minutes to reflect on this question independently and then, where possible, with a partner or small group. This next exemplar will explore the following learning outcome from Stage 3, My Stories, My Relationships. Through this learning outcome, children should be enabled to listen to and discuss the personal narrative of influential figures and examine the influence that this narrative may have on them. Remembering again that a lesson in GMGY will explore a single aspect of a learning outcome, this exemplar will enable children to listen to the personal narratives of influential figures. There are many different influential figures whose narratives children could explore through this learning outcome, including community members, activists, political figures, historical figures, religious or belief leaders, sports people, or performers, to name a few. When identifying the specific personal narratives children will listen to, teachers should bear in mind the needs, interests, voice, and choice of children. Earlier, the importance of story and identity to Strand 1 were highlighted. Notably, other people's stories are important. Our stories are not just our own. Our identities are shaped by and infused with relationships. Other people figure prominently in the narratives we use to structure our experience and ourselves. Children can listen to and discuss the stories of others as they are presented in a variety of different mediums through GMGY. These include books, poems, art, music, and photography, to name a few. Oral storytelling is another wonderful medium through which children can engage with the narratives of others. Engaging with oral storytelling can help children develop a greater sense of empathy for others by reflecting on the motives and actions of individuals or characters from these stories. Children can also develop new perspectives on their own lives and those of others. Children may also relate with individuals or characters from these stories and draw on their influence in their daily lives. When using oral storytelling as a methodology, teachers can invite family and community members or other influential people to share a story that provides an insight into a particular aspect of their life. For example, a grandparent might be invited to tell the children about their first experience of a particular religious or belief celebration. Alternatively, a community member could engage children in the story of a historical event which is important to the local community. Teachers might also invite another influential figure to share how they overcame adversity in their life. Teachers might enhance children's engagement before, during, and after the storytelling experience by using the KWL strategy. Before the visitor arrives, children could record what they already know about this storyteller and their story. They should also list what they would like to learn from the storyteller and their experience. After the oral storytelling has taken place, children might then reflect on what they learned from listening to the story. Here, children can be invited to reflect not just on what they learned about the storyteller and their experience, but also about themselves and their own experience through the process. An alternative to engaging children in oral storytelling from family, community, and other figures is to engage them in imagined or fictional storytelling from the teacher themselves or professional storytellers. When inviting storytellers to the school, teachers should liaise closely with them regarding the narratives they intend to share. Teachers should clearly share the aim of the lesson with the visitor and discuss the content of their story to ensure it is appropriate to the children's age and stage of development. Though changes may be made through the preparation process, a sense of authenticity and the voice of the storyteller should be maintained insofar as possible. A list of imagined oral storytelling and other recordings are available to CNS teachers to support teaching and learning in the My Stories strand. This next exemplar will explore the following learning outcomes from Stage 4, My Stories, My Spaces and Places. Through this learning outcome, children should be enabled to explore and discuss stories that originate in countries around the world and develop an appreciation for their cultural value. Remembering again that a lesson in GMGY will explore particular aspects of a learning outcome, this exemplar will enable children to develop an appreciation for the cultural value of stories that originate around the world. Again, when identifying stories for children to engage with through this learning outcome, teachers should be conscious of children's interests, needs, voice and choice. A photograph can be a great stimulus for GMGY. Engagement with a single picture, or indeed a collection of images, can provide children with the space to construct their own understanding of individual and community narratives. When using photographs with children, visual thinking strategies such as See, Think, Wonder can scaffold children's engagement with stimuli and foster critical, creative, collaborative and caring thinking skills. Through this strategy, children reflect in three ways. Firstly, they consider what they see or can notice about the picture. Secondly, children reflect on what their observations make them think about the stimulus and the story it is trying to convey. Finally, children consider what the stimulus makes them wonder about the story it shares, their own lives or the lives of others. In the case of the learning outcome for this exemplar, the See, Think, Wonder strategy can be an effective way to develop children's awareness of cultures from around the world. Children can then draw on this understanding in order to reflect on the cultural values of stories from around the world. When preparing to engage children in stories from Jamaica, for example, teachers could foster children's awareness of Jamaican life and culture by sharing a variety of pictures which each tell a little part of the Jamaican story or stories. Children might explore these photographs as a collective or as separate images in small groups. When preparing for a learning experience such as this, teachers should take a critical approach during the picture selection process. The photographs selected should not only help children to engage meaningfully with Jamaican stories and culture, but also be representative of the diversity of life and experiences in this country. Such representation can help to avoid the development of stereotypes, misconceptions, and assumptions in children. When examining the previous images, children might indicate that they see buildings, people at work, businesses, food, fruit, colour, a port, a storm, waves. When reflecting on what they think about these observations, children might state that they think this place is tropical because tropical fruit might be grown there. Children might think that this place is an island because a lot of pictures have been taken by the water. Children might think that some people in this place live in cities, others by the sea, and some on farms. They might also think that this might be a bit busy place, but also a quiet place too. Finally, children might consider what they would like to know about this place, its people and stories, and in doing so may wonder how many people live there, what people eat for breakfast, lunch and dinner, what language people speak, what this place was like in the past. They might wonder how climate change is affecting this place and its people, or if the country imports or exports the tropical fruits. They might wonder how often it rains, and even if they know someone who has ever been there. In continuing to help children foster their understanding of Jamaican life, stories and culture, teachers might invite children, through a jigsaw approach for example, to research particular topics relating to Jamaican life. This can provide children with the opportunity to follow through on their I wonder questions and contribute to more meaningful reflection on the cultural value of stories originating from Jamaica or written by Jamaican people. Once children have developed a sufficient understanding of life in a particular place or of a particular culture, in the case of this exemplar, that is Jamaican culture, teachers might then introduce a story originating from that culture with children. In addition to oral storytelling, picture books, photographs, and art, poetry can provide children with a tremendous insight into the narratives of individuals and communities. As an example, the poem Granny Is by Jamaican poet Valerie Bloom could be shared with children, who could then, through dialogue and reflection, consider the significance of this story to Jamaican people, life and culture. As a final point of reflection, it is important to consider the significance of intercultural education to this strand and each of the other strands of GMGY. Notably, intercultural education respects, celebrates, and recognises the normality of diversity in all areas of human life. It sensitises the learner to the idea that humans have naturally developed a range of different ways of life, customs, and worldviews, and that this breadth of human life enriches all of us. Importantly, intercultural education is an education that is for all children, not just those from minority ethnic groups. Often, local interpretation and implementation of intercultural education has in many instances been far from the original intention, meaning that teachers may adopt a celebratory intercultural approach. Celebratory interculturalism occurs when ethnic minority groups are positioned as the exotic other, valued by the dominant majority group who celebrate their differences. This form of interculturalism could be understood as a means of appeasement through which ethnic minority cultures are acknowledged and intercultural boxes are ticked. Instead of taking a celebratory intercultural approach, GMGY advocates for teachers and schools to take a critical perspective by helping students to think about and reflect on the world in which they live, to identify and discuss injustice and discrimination, to look at questions of inequality, power, recognition, agency, and representation, to focus on fostering solidarity and responsibility with the other, and importantly, to take action to realise change. Participants can now pause to reflect independently on this discussion question. Where possible, participants should then share their thoughts with colleagues, in pairs, or within a small group. We hope that you have benefited from your engagement in this webinar, which aimed to provide an overview of Strand 1, My Stories, to discuss the centrality of identity to the strand, to highlight the importance of story to this strand, and to outline approaches and methodologies for teaching My Stories. Thank you for engaging in this webinar on the My Stories strand of GMGY. This webinar has been provided by the CNS and ETB Patronage Directorate in ETBI. For further information, visit the CNS website or contact your school's GMGY coordinator. Alternatively, you could email etbpatronage@etbi.ie.